Welcome to the Sacred Spaces podcast. My name is Michael Crawford. I'm the Executive Director of Sacred Spaces Conservancy here in DC. We are passionate about saving sacred spaces, particularly in the most strategic city in the world, Washington, D.C. But we have affiliates all across the country. We're passionate about sacred spaces because they matter. They have huge economic impacts. They have sociological impact, obviously spiritual impact, right? And what we're seeing in today, especially in America, is something of a kind of crisis, I would call it. And today, I have a friend of Sacred Spaces, Dan Turner. He's written a book. We're going to talk about that. And you need to clue in because today we're going to be discussing some things that can really help your church. So, Dan, I've got a few questions for you. I'm so thankful you are here, and I'm glad that I get to introduce our audience to you. So,
thanks for having me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, and what you do now.
Well, originally from Western North Carolina. I have a bachelor's and master's in civil engineering before I transitioned to ministry, which is another story. But I've been pastoring a church in Washington, D.C. for 21 years, 21 and a half years. Love the city. You change the city, you can change the world, Michael. You know that.
Yeah.
So I'm passionate about Washington, D.C. I'm also passionate about churches that are in decline and nearing closure. And I'll share more about why that is later. But
yeah. Well, I'm interested in that. When did you become passionate about churches in decline? Because let's just keep it 100%. That's not typically something that someone has a passion for. How did that happen?
Yeah, I'm getting the nickname Dr. Death because those tends to be the churches that I walk into. Was just in another one this weekend, and man, it's like the same story, just a little bit different in every case. But the story started for me when I left seminary. My wife and I were newly married, came to this small church in Washington, D.C. 32 people. Average age was late 60s, mid 70s, somewhere in there. And it was pretty obvious that without some sort of incredibly drastic change, this church was never going to find growth again. Oh. So someone just sort of casually mentioned it to me and said, hey, have you heard of this idea of restart? And at that time, the idea of church restart, I think I found one little web page of back on I can't remember the name of the ministry, but literally just one page. I must have went to that page on the internet 100,000 times, just seeing what else could I get out of those few words. It just wasn't a lot there. But we ended up and walked through a process, and it was kind of learning as we went, man. It was people thought I was crazy. I actually wrote a letter to our denomination headquarters and said, hey, would you just write a letter releasing us to close the church? And they had no idea what we're doing. And one of our representatives said, hey, I don't really understand what you're doing. Would you just write the letter and I'll sign it?
Right.
Now, hopefully more people understand what a church restart is. Yeah. But that was the environment. And this was back in 2006.
Yeah.
So walk through that process. And Michael, we initiated the closure in the summer of 2006, and we were supposed to launch that fall. And by the time I got to midsummer, man, I was beat up. I think everybody in that little church was mad at me. We were trying our best, but I nearly walked away from it at that point, and had a good friend basically say, "Look, you've done the hard work of bringing this history of this church to an end. Why don't you stick around and see some of the fruit?" And man, isn't it awesome how God gives you just that right word at just the right time that your spirit really needs? So glad I stuck with it. But yeah, I walked away from that experience thinking, man, if I would have just had some kind of support or even a book that I could hand my board and say, read this and let's chat. Yeah. And that's really what started me on this journey is I don't want other people to walk through what I just did. So let me help them avoid all the pitfalls and mistakes.
Right. You don't want them. And you ended up writing a book.
Yeah. Yeah. So approached a friend of mine, Dr. Greg Wines, and pretty well-respected church consultant. And I said, Greg, look, there is no book. Let's write a book. It was a little prophetic. This was 2018, and we know what happened just a couple of years later. So the book was published through Exponential. I think it was published in 2019. It was one of their most downloaded resources that year, which tells you leaders were hungry for this. And then, of course, COVID hits. All these churches close. The acceleration rate for churches in decline just started ramping up. And so my phone's been ringing ever since.
Wow. So the book, what's it called? And what do you think is so helpful about it?
The book's called Dying to Restart. Pretty straightforward title.
Yeah.
I think what's, my background is an engineer, and it's just nuts and bolts, man. It's, and most people tell me, hey, I just read it in a day. And I think it's one of those books that if you walked through the journey of a declining church, you can relate.
Right.
I just lay it out there, everything from the flooding in the church basement and the mold in the bathrooms and just all the financial struggles of churches that are in that place, the relational struggles of churches that are going through severe decline. If you're walking through that, you immediately start connecting with it. So the thing I hear the most is, I read that book and I thought you were describing my church.
Yeah. So in the book, I read the book. I got the book. Great resource. Definitely should get that book. In the book, you talk about life cycles. And I think it's a beautiful way to understand the church for so many reasons. There's so much more I want to say, but I want to hear from you. Describe what you mean by a church life cycle.
Yeah. Everything has a life cycle. You think of nature, you think of organizations, businesses. Michael, think about the churches that Paul planted no longer exist, right? So even they had a life cycle. When I talk to churches about life cycles, I think most of churches that are walking through severe decline think that they're unique, that no other church has experienced this before, and they're terrible because this isn't thriving. I think it sort of allows them to realize, oh, no, wait a second, this is actually pretty normal.
Yes.
So it kind of helps bring the conversation to a place where, all right, let's jump in and diagnose now why you're in this place.
Yeah.
So we talk through, that's one of the first things I do with the congregation is talk through the church I was at in Pittsburgh this past weekend, talked through their life cycle, starting off with being planted in a little storefront in Pittsburgh 105 years ago. Mm-hmm. And in that birth, you have no money. You just have a vision. You really don't have a lot of relationships because it usually starts with a small group in your living room. Really not a lot of ministries, just one ministry of coming together. But out of that, the church begins to grow. And if you think of a bell curve, sort of the middle stage is church really starts clicking and growing, and they're growing into adolescence. And at some point, they plateau. For a lot of congregations, that tends to be around the 40-year mark. That they've hit their stride, they're clicking, but everybody gets the sense that we've lost something as they have plateaued. And it's amazing that how often churches will hit that around 40 years. There is something interesting about that number. And usually what they do is, we've lost something in terms of our vision, let's build a building. Right. And so they all build the Family Life Center, expand this, whatever it is, thinking that a building, a thing is going to help them get that energy that they've lost somewhere in their journey. Yeah. Buildings don't do it. Right. You know that.
Yeah. I know that. We know that at Sacred Space Conservancy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it takes more. It takes more. And so, unless they change something drastic, more than just a building, they're going to continue the decline. And so as you drop off the back side of the life cycle, they really lost vision. They start losing people, so they lose the relationships until they're down to just a few ministries way down the backside of the life cycle. And the very last thing they're going to hold on to is their structure before they die.
Right.
So we have no ministry. It turned in kind of the joke of the weekend, but it was a morbid joke in Pittsburgh. The youth director introduced herself, and she said, "I'm very close to the youth, all the youth in our church." And she said, "In fact, they all live with me because it's one teenager, my daughter." It was a morbid joke, but
Yeah.
that's how most churches end up. The ministry is just not there because the people are not there to do the ministry.
Yeah.
But they still hold the positions and the titles
Sure, yeah.
and meet. But when I interviewed people for the book, I asked pastors of dying churches, what was your vision for the church before you chose to restart? And they said, look, man, I was just trying to keep the doors open.
Yep.
Just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, that's not going to get me out of bed on Sunday morning.
Exactly. You only go so long with that. It's not a lot of fuel in the gas tank.
There's not. And it's instead of serving out of joy, then you start serving out of obligation. And man, we can't let this thing fail.
Yeah. We were talking in your office last week about this life cycle. So you have start, growth, then you have optimization.
Yeah.
And then we were talking about you go to optimization, then you start hitting some barriers because you're humming, and then some things happen. It could be 2020 COVID, it could be elections, it doesn't really matter. It'd be a fallout,
A government shutdown.
There's so many things that can happen in life. Just that it's been 40 years, it's been 50 years. A generation has come and gone. The generation that built the church is now leaving, or social economic issues. And then you had this word that I thought was so beautiful. It's revision.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, let me talk about it from the perspective of the church that I came to. So the church was called National Memorial Church of God. It was meant to be, there's 25 expressions of denominations that decided we're going to build a representative church in the nation's capital, the biggest one being the National Cathedral. So we were the attempt by Church of God Anderson to put their church in the nation's capital. And that was the vision. Well, for 60, 70 years, that was the vision. But as you know, things have changed in the church landscape. There's no more brand loyalty.
Right.
It used to be if you were in our tribe and you moved to D.C., you sought out a church in your tribe to go. But that's just no longer driving people anymore.
Right.
But people were holding on to that. There had never been an attempt to really let go of that vision and go after another vision. And I think for most churches, that's the case. There's been a vision that worked back in the day, and maybe that's why they have such a hard time letting go, because there was a time when it worked,
right.
And it was fitting the needs of the church and the community. But at some point, things change, and your vision has to change. How we preach and teach and share the gospel has to change to meet the new realities around us. Right. And so, if churches don't have the creativity or feel the urgency to change, they're going to start losing momentum as a church. Yeah, Michael, one of the saddest moments from the church I was just in, and I wish it was just them. We had a conversation around the table of when's the last time you remember the baptism being used, and they were all trying to figure out when it was, and somebody started sharing the story. Oh yeah, it was when we did that outreach to the YMCA, and 2 guys came and got baptized. And I thought, that sounds pretty recent. Okay. And I said, well, when was that? Oh, that was about 15 years ago. And I mean, it was like dead silence in the room because it just hit them. Like, oh, yeah.
It's been a while.
15 years ago since we saw a life transformed in our midst. Yeah. Now, I wish that were the record, but it's not. The record I've heard is 30 years of a church in Ohio.
Yeah.
30 years.
Yeah. Some people's baptismals don't work because they don't really need them.
They don't. They don't.
It'd be really sad.
But how is it okay? How is it okay that, if I were to say, just stop worshiping on Sunday mornings, they would be like, what? No, we can't be in church and do that.
Right.
Or if I said, let's stop giving God glory. Right. No. But we could say, let's stop reaching people and seeing lives transformed and still be a church. Right. And somehow that seems to be okay. Right. So I get a little frustrated with pastors because they should be sounding the alarm that we're in crisis. Right. We're still paying the bills and still showing up on Sunday. But what about the spiritual crisis of not seeing fruit that's happening?
Yeah. And so that idea of revision is basically going back and being open-minded.
Yeah.
And, I think some people, when they hear revision, they don't hear revision. They hear slippery slope. They hear abandon what got us here. They hear liberalism. They hear cave to culture, come up with different methods, stop preaching the gospel, make it entertainment. What's your response to that?
Yeah. And I think for some folks, that's how they see themselves as being faithful. Like, I'm going to be faithful to the word that the Lord gave me 40 years ago,
Right.
or gave us corporately 40 years ago. But I mean, when you read scripture, God is constantly changing and adjusting how he's directing his people. He talks about, forget the former things, look forward, stop looking back, Israel, look forward to what I'm about to do.
Right.
And I think part of the mentality, if we can call it what it is a lot of churches, they're at least living as if with the thought that God is never going to do anything greater than he did 40 years ago. Now, what do you think God would say about that?
Right. You might have a little issue.
That, God, your glory days are behind you.
Yeah.
So we're just going to try to get back to those glory days, because we certainly know you're not going to do something different in this place. And how dare we?
Right. It reminds me of the story in John 4. Remember the woman at the well said, our fathers, we built this and Jesus said, yeah, but let me show you something else.
The time is coming.
Yeah. Time's coming where this is. So I think it's easy when you're vulnerable and when you're under attack, you get protective, right? I mean, it's normal, right? If I sprain my ankle and I go to the doctor and the doctor goes to reach for my ankle,
flinch there.
I tense up. Like, can we just be honest? In church, when our churches are vulnerable and the numbers are down and giving and there's a threat, and then someone comes in or we're listening to a podcast, we're not always open, right? I remember, I tell a story all the time. I remember taking my mother to the doctor because she was bleeding and she shouldn't have been bleeding. And the doctor told her, well, we did the tests. You have a tumor, you have cancer. And she was just like, oh, well, it's because of this and it's because of that. And he just simply looked at her and said, listen, you have cancer. This is what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months if you don't do anything about it. If we do something about it, there's a greater than 50% chance that this will happen and you'll live a really good life. And he says, I understand this is traumatic. This is hard for you, but these are the facts. And then it took me taking her out of the room and some family, a while to really talk her through it. And then she was receptive. You know what I'm saying? But it's normal when your church is declining, when there's threats to the existence of your church, for us to be defensive, but it's not healthy.
It's not. I mean, that's part of what I love about the life cycle that we started off talking about, is it really just kind of gives you a mirror as a church to think about, where are we as a church? All churches have a life cycle. We're not going to live. This church isn't going to be here forever.
Yeah.
So where are we at?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, those are conversations that are difficult. They're hard to have without outside help.
Yeah.
Which is why I love Sacred Spaces work, because we sometimes just need that outside voice to come in and say what's actually pretty obvious, most of the time.
I was going to ask this later, but I think this is the right time. So when it comes to revision and then the next phase in the life cycle is revitalization, what are the obstacles? What are the things that keep us as churches from seeing what really is going on and addressing it? What are those things that are going, no?
Yeah. Oh boy. I think there's a few things there. One is pride. That we want to feel like that we're successful. And so any idea that maybe our best days were behind us and now something needs to change, it just starts hitting us, especially leaders first, but even in the pews. Which then we start turning off. And that's one of the dangers of an unhealthy leader, is when they stop receiving feedback in a healthy way.
Right.
And I think whole congregations get to that point where they're in decline, it's getting a little dysfunctional, and they turn off the feedback loop.
Right. I think pride's best friend is shame.
Absolutely.
Because pride is shame's makeup.
Yeah, I love that.
Because shame says, if I admit that I have a problem as a Christian, which I've had problems as a Christian, right? I haven't lived up to God's standards,
Yeah.
failed miserably. If I admit that there's something going on in my church, exaggerated shame says, what does that say about you? It's
yeah.
because you're defective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pride comes, knocks on the door and says, I can fix that. We will present. We will put on our ecclesiological makeup. We will make ourselves into something. We'll protect, we'll buffer, because we have to protect something. What are we protecting? We're protecting people finding out what? That you're normal.
You need to go ahead and preach that sermon
You
right
know,
there.
that you're right in the life cycle, that you're no different than anybody else.
Yep.
That you need God's help, that there's nothing wrong with you, that all the promises in Christ Jesus are still yea and amen. There's no condemnation because your church is failing. Nothing separates you from the love of God because your church is failing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's going to bring a charge against you? It's God who justifies. But when we get away from the gospel as it applies even to church dying to restart, we become susceptible to shame's makeup, which is pride.
Yeah. Which, you were saying we put on that front that everything's great. We show up at the ministerial pastors events. Oh yeah, everything's great. We give them our numbers, right?
Yeah.
And then we're playing that game of actually working even harder to put up the front, which just exacerbates the defeat that we're feeling behind the scenes that nobody's seeing. So it's like this terrible cycle.
You also mentioned about positions and structures. Do you think that's another thing that keeps us from recognizing where we are in this life cycle and also responding to it? Well, I'm this and we have this, and well, we've always done it this way. Why do your disciples eat food without washing first? It's we can't break the structures.
Yep.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
It is. And I think part of why we cling to that structure is it's all that's left.
Yes.
It's all, I'm the pastor of this church. I'm the Sunday school superintendent of this church. Whatever that title is, there might not be anybody in there. In fact, we had a church where there was nobody in the Sunday school left, but they still had a Sunday school superintendent that would not release that title.
And when your title and your position in church can become your identity. And now when the church is on decline, we're right back to where we just started. Well, what does that mean for me?
Yeah.
What does that mean for us? I think there is a corporate, exaggerated shame that's associated with the decline of the church, because we don't talk about it. But if we could be honest and put everyone in a room, I think a lot of churches, their core groups, the people that are left, would be asking, I do feel like, what's wrong with us? How did we get here?
Yeah.
What does it say about who we are? And what you're saying is nothing. You're just in a life cycle. Like if you take a dying church, right, a declining church, and you were to pick them up and slide them through redemptive history and just drop them in a period of, they'd fit right in. We wouldn't go, oh my gosh, what are they doing there? We've never seen God's people decline or struggle or lose numbers or money or be poor, right? Come on. Like you fit in.
Yeah. Which is, going back to the story of your mom, like the moment that we say help, or we pick up the phone called Sacred Spaces or Dying to Restart, help, I think is the moment that health starts entering the house.
It makes me wonder how many churches we could actually preserve, how many sacred spaces could be preserved if people would just raise their hand and say, you know what, this is beyond us. I'm bleeding. I've got this pain. I went to the emergency room. I went to my urologist, and they're saying, this is my treatment plan. And if I don't take, this is what's going to happen. I wonder how many churches have actually closed their doors, not because their doors needed to be closed, but because they didn't want or couldn't get themselves to the point to where they could say, I don't care if we look bad. I don't care if you judge us and say, well, how did you let the building get like this? Oh my gosh. If they just said, bring all that, because I know in Jesus there's no condemnation. You can say what you want. We know where we fit. We know who we are. The blood covers all this.
Yeah.
I wonder what God could do. I don't know.
Yeah. Boy, you need to do a whole podcast on shame in congregations, because I think that issue is huge. Identity and shame issues.
It's coming. We got to deal with I call it the emotional triumvirate: shame, fear, and guilt. So we talk about revision, but then there's revitalization. What is revitalization? Someone's listening now and they're like, what are they talking about that?
Yeah. So revision is kind of, tweaking. Things are going well, but we're going to tweak it. We're going to maybe reach a new demographic that wasn't here, 20, 30 years ago when we launched. Revitalization is digging a little deeper into the bones and saying, look, maybe even the structure isn't working that we set up in the church. The way that we're doing ministry, the people that we're doing ministry to isn't working, or our people have aged and we've not really changed our approach, or maybe younger people have shown up and we're still not giving priority to people that are coming into our church. Revitalization is a much more significant change, but it's still change at a programmatic level. It assumes that the DNA of the church is still healthy, that there's still plenty of good health in the culture of the church. But if you live with that too long without significant revitalization, you're going to get to the area where I work, where Dr. Death spends a lot of time. And that's down with the churches that are, 20, 30, 40 people. 40 people in a church in my world's almost a mega church, Michael.
Oh, yeah.
I wish they would call me far earlier than they do. And maybe it's the pride, but normally they don't call until they can't pay the bills. I hate to say that,
right.
But the financial crisis tends to get the attention of the church beyond anything.
Yeah. And I think shame plays a role in why we don't reach out personally in our marriages and our families. Because this is like the church is just it's a macrocosm of a microcosm, which is another reason, if you're listening to this, you're not alone. Like everyone deals with this to certain degrees. Personally, in our families, we don't reach out. But another reason is because of fear. Fear is about loss. If I raise my hand and say we need help, do we become prey? Does the predator come in? Just wants our building? Are they going to take stuff from us? Are they going to cause division? Are we going to lose everything? Because fear is always about loss. It's always about loss. And fear says, if you do this, you're going to lose something. So don't do it.
Yeah.
And people will find out who you are. And you're going to lose more. And guilt joins the party and says, and you know why all this is happening? Because of what you did and didn't do.
Yep.
And those three emotions have us by the throats.
Yeah.
So then we finally get through so much suffering that we pick the phone up and we're like, hey, we need help. Not when we were 160 and declining and we had 2 years left, but now when we have nothing left. And we're not here to condemn. We're just analyzing and diagnosing and saying, before you get to restart, every church, would you agree with the statement? Every church has opportunities before they get to restart.
Oh my goodness. Yes,
Right?
1,000 times.
But if you get to restart, it's typically, tell me if you agree with this, it's typically, as a general rule, because you have waited and put off and maybe even tried some stuff that didn't work. But there should be NASA has a go, no go.
Yeah.
Where it's like, we're pushing a button. So if anyone doesn't have an issue, it's blast off. And if there's an issue, it could be problematic. So raise your hand now. And oftentimes what we do personally in our churches, I know I'm guilty of this, is we don't press a button.
Yeah. Or we've got one or two families in the church that say, you need our money.
Oh, that's the worst.
Don't press that button.
Yeah.
I'm convinced a lot of these smaller congregations are being held hostage by just a few people.
Yeah, with money. It's let me ask you this. This is just in my observation. I've observed that a lot of churches maintain this season where they're really on the edge of restart because they have a little bit of money. It's almost like the worst thing that can happen to your church is to have, $800,000 in the bank and have 20 people. Hear me out. I'm not saying it's a sin. I'm saying because even in my life, it's kind of one of those things. What did the guy in Proverbs say? Don't give me too much because then I'll deny you. Don't give me too little because then I'll steal, But I have seen when a church has a lot of money, it can act as a spiritual bypass because you don't necessarily need to do something because you can always write a check.
Yeah. And so, we have a church very close to my church that, I know on the inside is maybe 30 people, and yet the roof was falling apart, but they had a major gift. So in comes the Calvary, the roof is fixed, crisis averted. And so now we've got, more years ahead of us without a crisis, when sometimes a crisis is the best thing that could happen for a church.
Wow. Yeah.
And then you don't want to waste a good crisis.
Yeah.
There's leadership 101, right?
That's a word right there. Sometimes a crisis is the best thing that can happen for a church.
It's a gift.
That sounds so wrong.
It does.
Man. It sounds so bad. Like, are you a Christian? Like, do you believe the Bible? What are you talking about? But let's think about this theologically. Sometimes a crisis is the best thing that can happen. Yeah. If you take that statement again and drag it over redemptive history, you'd be like, yeah, sometimes,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, James says rejoice in trials, right?
Yeah, they're there to teach us something.
They're there. And, we avoid it like the plague individually, but I think even corporately, we try to avoid it as well.
Yeah, who wants a crisis? I want to be crisis free. I don't want any problems. I don't even want to know about this life cycle stuff. I just want my own life to always be optimized, never need revision, never need revitalization, never need a restart. Oh Lord, no. But after that, there's a last phase of this, which is legacy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you've survived and not revitalized, and then you go through, there is a window where, we can help you restart, and, we've seen good success, but if you miss that window, there has to be something to restart, Michael. So I have churches that will call and say, we have 6 people and a mountain of debt. And I basically say, there's nothing to restart. It's gone. You need to call your jurisdiction and release the property to them. But yeah, so you take the window. That's what I'm going to say to you. Take the window and don't wait. The worst thing you could do is wait when it feels like that crisis. And, when I talk to congregations, there's a general sense in the church. They know that crisis is coming.
Mm-hmm. They always know.
They know.
It's obvious.
It's obvious to everybody, but they're not talking about it.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's so sad. You don't really see that in the book of Acts. The church was pretty transparent. In Acts 6, when there was a problem, with the daily distribution, with the Hellenistic widows were not being fed, it's just open. Yep, this is the problem. You guys come fix it. We're not going to fix it. We'd have to leave that. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to do this. You're going to pick 7. Boom, good fix. You know what I mean? When there was a famine in Jerusalem, it was like, all the churches know there's a famine in Jerusalem. There's a problem. Let's get them.
Revelation, you've left your first love, right? I mean, it's just like
Philippians, Euodia and Syntyche are fighting. Urge them, comrade, to get. Like, it's not, let's Facebook it. Let's vague post it. Let's leave the. We need to move towards that, right? But just for clarity, because I think some people go, yeah, we need a restart. What is implied by a restart? Because I think some people don't really understand what that really means.
Yeah, be careful what you ask for at this point. And And some people want to treat it like a silver bullet. Let me kind of rewind just a second, because one of the questions I get the most is, what's the difference between revitalization and restart? Revitalization assumes that your culture is healthy enough, that you still have enough healthy DNA to be able to change some of your programs, to be able to change focus, get new vision, and then you'll find new health. And I pray that your church is in that place, because once we move to restart, then we're talking a lot more pain in the transition. It took you a long time to get there, and a lot of decisions to get to that place of needing a restart. And I don't sugarcoat it. It's going to hurt to do the restart. And so restart for us means you don't get a resurrection without a death. And so we are actively looking for how we can help lay that unhealthy culture down. And Jesus said, if you want life, if you want to find life, then lose it.
Right.
And I love Mark's version of that, when Jesus says, lose it for my sake and for the sake of the gospel. That little phrase Mark adds in there. And I love that, because I can say to churches, what would you lose for the sake of the gospel?
Right.
Like, what would you give up for the sake of the gospel so that you could find life? In that restart place, just like the church I was in this past weekend, I asked the question, are you willing to do whatever it takes? I mean, in fact, I have a moment when I have just the leaders gathered, and I ask them, are you willing to resign your positions and surrender that? Now, you're talking to church where that's all they have.
Right, yeah.
And so that is a huge step, but it's like this holy moment where you're asking a church, would you surrender your will for this church and your preferences for this church? And we actually bring in an all outside board to help lead that church through some pretty substantial changes. I put it this way: you can either make 1,000 decisions to change the music and to change the carpet and to change the seating and all the things that are going to just suck the life out of that church, or we can make one giant, big, hairy, painful decision to restart and to lay our past to rest and to launch something brand new using all of the people and the resources from the previous congregation. So it's not a silver bullet. And I tell people, like, if you can do anything else, Michael, do it before you call me. In fact, one of the ways that I kind of fill people out is read the book, because it's, pretty nuts and bolts, and read the book. And if you still want to talk, then we'll have a conversation with you and your board. But I try to talk them out of it before I try to talk them into it.
Yeah, restart can be difficult. Legacy. What kind of things are involved in legacy? What kind of things should churches be thinking about when it comes to that?
There comes a point where even the best efforts to revive that space, it really comes down to a stewardship question. Like, given where we're at as a church, even the best that we could do at this point is still not a great use of God's resources. I mean, I know of a church in Alabama, 2 sisters meet every Sunday in their church building, and they're still having church. But is that a good use of resources in God's kingdom, that we're devoting a whole building and utilities to 2 people? I would say not. And so it becomes a point where it's a stewardship question, where God, if we're open-handed with this, you probably have something you'd rather do with the resources that we're using for just a few people.
Right.
And as hard as that is to give up, it's really an act of obedience and surrender to say, whether it's, we encourage all of our churches that walk through Restart to have a game plan just in case it doesn't. And we've got good success, but it's a vulnerable time. Make sure you know who that property and the resources are going to go to, so that another church might be launched out of the resources of a dying congregation.
Yeah. It's challenging, isn't it? I've found that it's easy for us in our private lives to think about legacy. We need wills. We need trusts. What happens to my car, my house, the savings I have, the piece of art? We typically plan for that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to church, we don't typically see beyond ourselves. And the stark reality is every church building outlives every congregation. We all know that intuitively. So does your church have a will or a trust? Is there a long-term plan for the facility to continue doing or being used the way you guys are using it?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's legacy. We're so passionate about it. I know we talked about this at Sacred Spaces. We have a legacy assessment and a legacy curriculum to help churches think through this.
It's good stewardship.
Yeah. It's like, what do we do about this? This is not just for us. We're going to die off. We're going to move. But God gave us this land and this facility, and we meet in it, and God's done amazing things in and through the facility. Yeah. What if it could live on for 50 years more, 100 years more? But what would that mean we would have to do or be willing to do?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it comes back to that question of stewardship. And, you and I have both pastored churches for a long time. You sit in a room with a dying family member, and then suddenly when that person passes, you see the dysfunction because they haven't planned well.
Yeah.
And if it's awkward with individuals, when it comes to a whole corporate entity like a church, it really gets awkward. So, I mean, we've seen some crazy things happen with churches where, the few people that were left loved animals and gifted a church property that was built for God's glory to go towards an animal shelter, which I love animals. We've got cats. But hey, I mean, people spent their lives and devoted ministry years to build. And so not planning for that is really negligent.
And I think what churches and people who are listening need to hear is that there's help. Like, just like you would go to a financial planner and they'd be like, well, here are your options to plan. Do you have you can get a trust, you can get a will. Here's the difference between them two. Who's your executor? What do you want to have happen with your stuff? Do you have anybody that will curate that and make sure? You can do the same thing in the church, because sometimes, the church on the legal side, there's trustees, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes we go and it's like the trustees aren't even alive anymore. And we've got all kind of legal. We can help you do that. And it's not about what we want for your church or what Dan wants for your church. It's what do you guys want? What would you like to be true of your church building, of your church's legacy 50 years from now? And how do we help you create a plan and execute on that?
Yeah, Sacred Spaces really does have some of the best and brightest people in our city in Washington, D.C. Like, we're walking through a tricky real estate issue trying to purchase a property. So Sacred Spaces is helping us with a tax and legal advisor, with a realtor that's helping us walk through a really tricky negotiation with a greedy developer, just to be blunt.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's expertise that we just don't pull off the shelf as a church. I mean, that's really important giftedness that we certainly don't have. Maybe some churches do, but I think most churches need a resource like that. So for wherever you're at in ministry, I've been really thankful for Sacred Spaces.
Yeah. We talked a bit, and we kind of agreed that we have a lot of Ezras in the church and not a lot of Nehemiahs. And Ezras are they're people of the law. They're visitation, preaching, teaching groups, worship, Sunday school, children's ministry, marriage ministry, adults ministry, reaching people, outreach. You need that.
Yeah.
Nehemiahs are like, where are we going to do this at?
Let's marshal the
Do we
troops.
have security, in this crazy world? What's our budgets look like? Who's serving where? What about the teams? What about the systems and structures?
Strategy.
What is the strategy? What's the goal? Where are we getting our resources from?
Mm-hmm.
How do we maintain them? How do we sustain them? Where are we seeing leakage?
How are we smart about resourcing the church now? Because if you're not resourcing the church in ways other than the pew, you're not in the 21st century.
Yeah. So we need more Nehemiah thinking. And one of the things I'm thankful for you and our partnership, Sacred Spaces and Dying to Restart, is that we fit so well together to help one another and the team. So there's a church or there's a person listening to this and they're going, oh, this is us. What's their next step?
Yeah. First, I just want to say, don't wait. the longer you wait, the less your chances of a successful resurrection are going to happen. So don't wait. Reach out, and one of the first things I would do is just have you read the book. And I'm not even trying to sell books; I give them away more than I sell them, to be honest, because I have such a heart for this.
Where can they get the book? Dying to Restart.
It is on Amazon. You can go to Amazon and find Dying to Restart. Greg Wines, Wiens, and Dan Turner. So you can get it there. A lot of times, I'll ask them to have their whole board read the book and then have a conversation about it. And it may just be a conversation of, do we actually need to do this drastic of a step? Mm-hmm. And sometimes the answer is no, which again, I say, great. But if you're anywhere near the ballpark of needing to do this, reach out sooner than later. I usually have folks read the book, and then I'll jump on a Zoom, and I've done this with hundreds of churches, and just have a conversation with you, let you ask questions. And so much of this is about trust.
Yeah.
And so if we were to work together in a restart, it's going to take huge amounts of trust. And so, for instance, the church I was just in this weekend, it's been over a year since we started that conversation. It's been months and months of multiple conversations, them getting to know me. Is this an African-American church? I obviously am white. Yeah. And so the level of trust there, I came in saying, look, what's about to happen is not going to look anything like colonialization.
Right.
Just to make sure they knew that I could be trusted.
Yep.
So reach out and have the conversation, and then we'll start building a relationship. Would love to do what we can to help. It's my heart that somebody's not going to walk through what I had to do in 2006. And, I even will tell churches, do not do this alone.
Yeah.
I guess I would say that to them as well. Because it sounds like, we could do that. We'll just shut down everything and start again. Don't do it alone. Believe me, don't do it alone. If you value your sanity, don't do it alone. And the other side of that is, let me put a more positive spin on it, is one of the things that I think we do bring to the table is really bringing a partnership around you. If you're walking through that season of restarting, you're going to see the unity of the body of Christ at work. When Sacred Spaces shows up and says, what can we do here with issues you're having with your deed or your building?
Yeah.
And maybe your denomination or other pastors in the city show up and say, let's lock arms here for this season.
Yeah.
Don't miss that.
Right.
It's beautiful. We love talking about unity. This is one of those chances that you'd get to actually live it out and see it. And it's beautiful to see.
And I'm really excited too. The things you and I are working on, these assessments that people can take, we can just send them to them. They're free, and your board or your group could take them, and it's objective. It just, again, shines light on your strengths, your weaknesses, the things. That's really great. Do you think there is a threat, or let me put it this way: in your mind, is there a crisis? Is there a church crisis of decline, facility lossing, closure? Would you define it as a crisis?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a crisis before COVID, Michael.
Yeah.
And after COVID, that decline has just accelerated. Over a 20-year period, the average attendance in a church moved from 120 to 65.
In any other industry, that would be
alarm bells. I mean,
yeah, it would be it would be catastrophic. Can you imagine if McDonald's said that?
Oh, but they're done.
If Google, Apple said that, oh yeah, we're 50% down. They'd be like, we're done.
We talked about the life cycle of the church. So, a lot of people have been looking at, well, how many churches are on the back side of that life cycle? Former engineer, I love to see the data. And, for years, people have been saying to me, that number is somewhere between 80 to 95%. And, the engineer in me said, show me the numbers. I don't believe you. I've been working with every denomination, and I'll ask them all the same thing. Like, what percentage would you say? And they're all telling me the exact same thing. In our state, in this region, nationwide, 85% of our churches are either plateaued or in decline. And then when you get to the very bottom of that life cycle, that group that's nearing death, every year that number is growing and growing and growing. We're closing 4,000 to 6,000 churches a year in the United States.
Crazy.
Now, we used to plant more than that. We used to plant like 4,500 churches so we could replace, theoretically. We're not doing it anymore.
No.
Our population is growing. We're not showing a net positive with the number of churches, which means we're losing ground, Michael.
Yeah, I was talking to Rick Reinhardt. He said that some people are projecting that in the next decade it could be 100,000.
100,000 churches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In less than a decade, actually. It's because it's snowballing. I was talking to someone yesterday in DC, and they're very knowledgeable about the church culture and churches, and they just started naming off churches. This church is dying. This one, this one, this one, this one, this. And we were up to 5. I was like, oh, stop. We're good. It's like, oh, this church has less than 10 people on it. We need to, we need to do something about it. And my passion is, people say, well, the church isn't a building. Well, we know the church isn't a building. The church uses buildings, just like every other institution uses buildings. We're in Western civilization now.
Yeah.
We're not 2,000 years ago. We're not in an agrarian society. Some people will say, yeah, that's why we need to go to this house church and this. But I think these sacred spaces are worthy of being preserved. They bring more than just a physical presence. A lot of people, as I stated earlier, would say that even a sizable, just a normal congregation can bring in tens of thousands of dollars directly to the community.
Yeah.
Just the hope, the person who's thinking about self-harm that walks into the church that doesn't. I mean, the church typically only makes the news when it's bad news.
Yeah.
Right? That's just the news. We don't have any really good news. They save it for like 30 seconds at the very end of 30 minutes of everything's terrible. Yeah. There's a movement going on in the nation, in the Northeast, in DC, with Sacred Spaces, with Dying to Restart. We care about churches and their health, and we want them to be preserved, both the people and the places that those people gather. We want that.
Yeah.
We think it's important.
Yeah.
We think it's important. And God's always had a place for his people. For the people who are hardcore, maybe right spiritual people, it's like, yes, but God has always been concerned with geography. From the take dominion of all the earth. There are places. Abraham was called to a place. There was a promise of a land. A temple was built, right? And God has his groups of his gathering of his people. Even the early church, they met in homes and in schools. And it was there. This is just normal.
It is. And what I love about the vision of Sacred Spaces is it's kingdom size.
Yeah.
It's larger than the local church. And so, we have 2 other churches that worship in our building. And so as we think about preserving those spaces, there's also Sacred Spaces is such a great resource for maximizing the kingdom effectiveness of those spaces.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's so important. So our message to you is thank you for listening. Do not let shame, fear, and guilt keep you stuck personally, in your families, in your churches, and especially corporately as a church. Don't let shame whisper, just put on pride makeup because you don't want people to figure out that there's something wrong with you. Don't let fear threaten you with all this loss and destruction. And don't let guilt say, you blew it and there's there's hope. But only if you raise your hand and say, I need help. And today is the day. Grace and peace.